I am a dad, among lots of other hats that I wear in life, and I've observed something about my kids that's also true of myself, probably you too as well. Now that school has started, my kids seem to have an evening ritual, and the evening ritual is, how do I find an excuse to stay up later than bedtime, right? And we're making excuses. Perhaps it's in the water we drink, but I don't think that's it. But I notice that those nights that certain of my kids avoid, especially going to sleep, the next morning is pretty predictable, isn't it? When it's time to get up for school, they are tired. And get this, they don't want to get up yet. Weird, right? Yeah. And they eventually get up and around, but it's not usually very pleasant. But they're not their best selves. And you know what? That's true of me too. I'm usually not at my best when I don't get enough sleep, right? And it's not like the morning surprised me. I just didn't get to sleep when I should have. Now, life is full of habits, is it not? We have good habits, we have bad habits, but life is full of good habits. And the most successful people in life have good habits. Good habits are simply premeditated choices that we make to help create a better future outcome in our lives. We want something better in the future. We create good habits now and we put them into practice. They're actually premeditated, aren't they? In fact, our brains love habits. Some of you may know this, but I came across an article, and there are lots of them out there, but more and more research is showing that our brains actually love habits. I came across one from an article recently that it's called Creatures of Habit, the Neuroscience of Habit and Purposeful Behavior. And admittedly, we have a lot to learn, but here's what we do know about our brains. Here's what the article says. It says, despite our sense of control and purpose in our lives, right? We want to be in full control. A significant proportion of our daily behavior is actually driven by habit. But here's what's crazy. You've made many of your choices before your day has even begun, and you don't even know it. And it's a product of the habits that you have formed in your life. And too often, let's be honest, myself included, we are overconfident in our own ability to make hundreds of choices each day, which help us become the kind of person we want to become. We are overconfident. We think, I don't need habits. I'll make all the right choices when the time comes. And what usually happens, right? No one says I want to waste my day. No one says I want to waste my life. Let's be honest, for all of us creatures, we just don't always form good habits. Now, if you want to become the person that God created you to be, and I suspect you do, and you want to live in a life that makes a difference in this world, it's going to take more than just the desire to do so and a few practices now and then when you get around to it. You're going to need good habits. And today I want to introduce new language for our church. And the language is what we're going to call the core four. And it is the priorities that help all of us get from here to there. Where is the there? Wherever you are, that is your here. Getting there is someone who has a life of joy, someone who has a life of peace, someone who has a life of purpose, someone who stands at the end of your life and says, you know what, I made a lot of mistakes, but God used me in some really powerful ways too. It's a life of being intentional and purposeful about the things that give and breathe life to your soul and make a difference in the world. That's where we want to go, and it will require good habits. You have a handout in front of you, and so your first fill in there of our core four, we're going to introduce them each of the next 4 weeks. And what we're calling the core four is just simply 4 habits that contribute to becoming a fully developed disciple of Jesus. We've spent the entire summer in the Gospel of Mark talking about a disciple of Jesus, becoming more like Jesus. And what are the habits that we use to contribute to that? Now, we're all at different places on our spiritual journeys. Some of you in this room, very mature in your faith. Others of you are really struggling in your faith. Others of you are really new to this faith. And let's be honest, some of you really aren't even sure you're convinced of this Jesus thing. And that's okay. And I encourage you to start wherever you are and to move forward to a better version of yourself by putting these habits in place in your life. Habits, for many of us, they conjure negative baggage, don't they? When many of you think habits and you think spiritual disciplines, you think it in spiritual language. Let's be honest. Some of you, when you think of habits, you're like, yep, a bunch of things I have to do. A bunch of things that I ought to do. You think of a checklist in your life to make sure you check boxes. What you think of is someone is trying to control me. What you think is it's a way for people to compare themselves to one another. None of those things are what we're trying to accomplish. We also realize there's more than 4 good habits in your life to contribute to spiritual growth. We want to focus on these 4. We also realize that habits don't guarantee deep spiritual maturity, but these good habits, you put them into practice in your life, you will grow spiritually in your life. So the first habit, as we just sang that last song, is simply to abide in Jesus. And we'll flesh out that language here in just a minute. You could also call it your own personal spiritual growth plan. Putting your own personal spiritual growth into practice in a way that no one else can do it for you. You have to do it yourself. What are the habits for you to personally grow in your own life? I invite you to open your Bible to John chapter 15. We'll begin in verse 1. You can also use the handout. You can read the words on the screen in front of you. John chapter 15, beginning in verse 1. Before we read these words of Jesus, I'll remind us that you were created for a relationship with God. You are not a robot. You are not a machine. You were created for a relationship with the creator of the universe. And what we're going to see is that Jesus is going to use a powerful, organic metaphor. The metaphor is a grape vineyard. And the language is going to be so strong. What Jesus is going to say is that in your mind, you might feel tempted to kind of minimize what Jesus says. You might be like, can I just go back to my checklist of spiritual do's and don'ts? Because the metaphor is incredibly strong, and Jesus means every word that he says in this metaphor. John 15, verses 1 through 6. Here's what we read. I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, Jesus says. You are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. See, the greatest investment you could ever make in your life, in order for your life to be rich and vibrant and purposeful and deeply satisfying, is to make this organic relationship a priority in your life. It starts here. God is real. God is personal. As we said last week, God showed up 2,000 years ago, and his name is Jesus. And Jesus conquered the grave, and he is alive. And in this text, Jesus calls himself the true vine, which is the source of life for those branches. The disciples, you and me, are branches where the grapes grow. God is the gardener who prunes dead branches so that healthy branches can grow instead. You understand the metaphor. And I realize that there's an Old Testament reference here regarding Israel in this text in John 15. Our purpose this morning to emphasize how it personally affects you and me. Now, Jesus uses that verb, what the New International Version translates as remain, as we read, 6 times. That verb remain, is used in verse 4, 5, and 6, as we just read. But it's also used, if you read the couple of verses following, 7, 9, and 10. It's a really powerful verb here. A better translation than what the NIV uses is the verb abide. Abide is a more robust word. And Jesus wants us to know that abiding in him, if we are a disciple, is not optional. Abiding in him is not just for the super spiritual people, the spiritual giants. It is actually required for your growth. Because there's no point in a grapevine that produces no grapes, is there? And in the same way, there's no point in your spiritual journey if you don't abide in Jesus. So your next fill in there, before you can abide, though, you must first be connected to Jesus in relationship, of course. And there are three ways that various church traditions emphasize connection with Jesus. And I just want to stereotype here for a section. How do we first get connected to Jesus? Because many of us in this room come from different church traditions that talk about how do we initiate this connection with Jesus. The first is, some of you come from this background, is sacramental participation. You become connected to Jesus through the church, whatever church tradition that is. And so how you connect with Jesus and how you initiate that relationship is to participate in communion and confirmation, perhaps baptism. And there's a prescribed process from the church, and then the church tradition then mediates your connection with Jesus. These are really beautiful practices. The problem is the New Testament doesn't describe your initial connection with Jesus that way. Those traditions all came later, after the New Testament was written. But those are beautiful practices. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater and reject those beautiful things. Let's reorient our purpose. Those things do not inherently connect you initially to Jesus. The second one, some of you know this would be your tradition, is that you are connected, that is through intellectual belief or a public decision. So we are agreed to a certain set of theological beliefs. We say a certain prayer, or perhaps you're baptized as a public profession, and that inaugurates your connection to Jesus. Well, truth is certainly important. Believing good doctrine certainly matters. Bearing fruit, though, is not just in your head or out of your mouth. Some of you know this. When one of your kids hauls off and whacks another kid and slaps him on the face, and it's usually the smaller one, and they come crying to you, "Johnny punched me in the face." And you're like, "Johnny, what do you say?" You know this. Johnny says, "I'm sorry." You know, it's like, I was looking for a little more than that, Johnny. I wasn't looking for you to say the words. I was looking for a change of your heart posture, right? And out of the overflow of a changed heart posture of contrition for what you have done, then I want those words to reflect that reality, right? We know that's true. So intellectual belief and a public decision is important, but it has to be more than that. Thirdly, you might come from a tradition that says it's experience with the Trinitarian God. It's an emotional kind of experience. Perhaps you encounter God in a way that's unmistakable. For some people, it's, I'm out in nature and I just realize how big God is, and that there's something that just sparks in you. Perhaps it's at a worship concert. Perhaps for some of you, it was an altar call when it was given an invitation, and it was a very experiential thing for you. Perhaps it was when you were reading the Bible. Like Martin Luther and John Wesley described that a couple hundred years ago. They described they were reading the Bible and their eyes just lit up and they understood God. No doubt these things can happen, but they can sometimes mislead us, and they're not universal. Everyone doesn't have that kind of experience. Some people do. Why do I mention these three ways of that initial connection? Because it is important to emphasize that before you can abide in Jesus, be connected to the vine, you have to respond to God's initiation toward you. Your relationship with God, hear me say this, has to have a starting point. You cannot inherit mom or grandma's theological spirituality and connection to Jesus. You have to have a starting point, and it is personal, and it requires a response to the good news about Jesus. Paul said it like this in Colossians 1, verses 21 through 23. Notice the contrast. There's a before and there's an after. Here's what he says. Once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior. Yeah, you. We don't see ourselves as rebellious against God sometimes, but we were. Every single one of us. He goes on, but now God has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in His sight, without blemish and free from accusation. If you continue in your faith, established and firm, and do not move from the hope held out in the gospel. This is the gospel that you heard and that has been proclaimed to every creature under heaven, and of which I, Paul, have become a servant. There has to be a starting point, and it is called faith in Jesus and what He has done. And it might look different for all of us, but there has to be a starting point in order to then abide in Jesus. The starting point here in Colossians 1 is to acknowledge that we were alienated from God and it was due to our sin. And reconciliation with God is offered through faith in Jesus. And you have to believe and then receive. That's what the New Testament uses. Its code word is grace. I receive something I did not deserve, nor did I earn. I simply say yes, because Jesus wants a relationship with me. And once we believe and receive, Jesus calls us to the habit then of abiding in Him. So, what does it mean to abide in Jesus then? On your handout there, I give you a couple of them. Jesus gives us three aspects of the habit of abiding in Him. What does this look like? Because what I do not want us to capture is, here's the checklist. Here is, rather, expectations for success, for abiding in Him. And the first is this: what does abiding look like? It's really, really simple. First, it just means to depend on Jesus daily. To depend on Him. Part of faith in Jesus and choosing to be a disciple of His is living as if this, listen to these words, living each day as if Jesus is better at meeting your needs and providing for you than you are for yourself. He's better at meeting your needs and providing for you than you are yourself. John 15, verse 4, we read these words, remain or abide in me as I also abide in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must abide in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you abide in me. Jesus is making a really clear point here. Can a branch live without a connection to its nutrient source? Of course not. Earlier this spring, my wife and I were trimming out some really nasty vines in our backyard, and immediately there were some that were so long and out of control, they were stuck in some of the telephone wires on the back of our property line. And we cut them off from their source, and some of them, as I began to pull the vines, they were so attached, I didn't really want to, have the electric company have to come out and do a repair. So I left them. But here's what was fascinating. These vines were twirling around the telephone wire up there. I cut them off at their source, and within the day, you notice they were dead. The impact was immediate. It was profound. Don't tell anybody, but they're still there on the telephone pole. They die immediately because without the source of life feeding them, they die. And the same is true with you and me. To depend on Jesus means to make choices every day as if the vine providing the resources that you need are available for you to be happy, healthy, and blessed. Here's the challenge, though. Many of us want to find our happiness and purpose and success from other things and from other people, don't we? And just by a couple of examples, some of us, let's be honest, we want to find that sense of happiness and purpose in our relationships. It could be one particular relationship. It could be all of our relationships of the people that are really close to us. And we want to position people to bring us happiness. And so perhaps what it causes us to do is we compromise our values just to keep people in our lives because we need them. Perhaps other people in our lives, we control them because we need them to give us value. Perhaps we use people as if they exist for us And here's the thing, in all those relationships, when we want a person or people in our lives that are meaningful, we want them to give us our value. Here's Jesus saying to us, depend on me because no one can give you what I can give you, Jesus is saying to us. And when we depend on Jesus, our relationships with other people, what we have when He is the source of life for our souls, other people then are simply gifts that we receive, that we cherish. They're not objects to manage. But for others of us, this is increasingly hard. For others of us, our purpose, our sense of how do we get through life and we find what we really want, we do it through amusement. Amusement simply means without thinking, right? Without thinking. And here's the thing, we live in a world of pain and hardship, and it's very easy to simply run from distraction to distraction in our lives to ease our pain, isn't it? And we know the pain's there, and so we run. And so in order to avoid hard realities, we run towards things which are rather mindless to numb the pain. There are endless possibilities for this. But for us in our own souls, as we run from thing to thing to thing, we spend our money and we spend our free time doing the next fun thing. And when we find ourselves caught in the daily grind of life, we dream of doing the next fun thing. Amusement. To drown out the pain in life. And Jesus says, you can face the hard without these mind-numbing activities which fill your soul. To be clear, fun activities are not wrong. Avoiding life's challenges, though, makes your life only harder. The alternative is to abide in Jesus and to live as if the best life is the one that He offers you, and it's only found in Him no matter what else comes your way. The second thing that we learn about abiding, what does it look like, is to delight in God's pruning. Hear me out. This is so counterintuitive, isn't it? As humans, we naturally have this avoidance of pain, don't we? We avoid pain at all costs, but avoiding pain is actually really painful too, isn't it? I remember several years ago, I'm embarrassed to say it in some ways, but I was changing a toilet in my first house, and there was only one toilet, and I had young kids, and so it was pretty important that I get this right. I'm changing out the toilet, and I'm tightening it. Listen, guys, if you ever change a toilet, listen to what I'm about to tell you, okay? I'm tightening, and you know porcelain is glass, and I'm tightening and getting us in, and next thing I know, I tightened it just a little too much. Crack. It was about 8 o'clock at night. Nobody's really open in town. And in my flustering, I run my arm through, and all of a sudden, the cracked porcelain slices right into my forearm. And it was several layers deep. And it looked really gross. And I'm like, this was not in the plan. And as I stood there thinking, we need a toilet in this house. I've got young kids. I just messed up. And I have a really big problem, a really, really deep cut on my arm. And here's the thing, guys. In that moment of pain, I was rather ashamed. I didn't want to call a friend to come and finish installing the toilet while I went to the ER, but that's what I did. In my shame, I could have said, I can't let anybody else know. I could have said, I don't want to go because the stitches are going to hurt, it's going to cost money, and I could have said, no, I'll manage just fine. But I would have caused more problems for myself, wouldn't I have? And that's the way it is with pain. Pain gets more severe when we avoid dealing with our pain. And Jesus said this is true in our lives spiritually as well. Listen to verse 2. Jesus says, He, my Father, cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, He prunes, so that it will be even more fruitful. Those of you who are gardeners understand the value of pruning. You cut off the dead so that new life can grow in its place. Partly, pruning hurts. It is the natural part of gardening, though, pruning in your life is also part of your growth. So why do I say you should delight in God inflicting pain upon you? Let's be clear. I don't think God inflicts pain upon you. I don't think that God is vindictive or angry or he's a cruel tyrant. No, but God does use pain in our fallen world to awaken us to better things. It is amazing how God has our attention in the middle of our pain. C.S. Lewis said this. He said, pain insists upon being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our consciences, but shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. We often want a life free from pain, don't we? And the life free from pain is coming when King Jesus comes back, but it's not here yet. And God offers you a life where pain grows you into a more beautiful person that is deep and grounded, and it is in our pain when we grow that we become more like Jesus. But that doesn't make you want it anymore, does it? Oh, please bring on the pain, said no one ever, right? Well, I suggest two specific realities to help you think about God's pruning in your life, your next fill-in. First, pruning is painful and necessary for healthy fruit in your life. Jesus says that. Have you ever met a child who's never heard no? You might see them at the grocery store. Maybe it's in your family or whatever. They always seem to get what they want, and they have caretakers who are incessant upon giving the child everything they always want. Listen, let's just agree together, they're not very pleasant human beings, are they? When you always get what you want, you're not very pleasant. Why? You need pruning in your life. We all do, because it makes you a better version of yourself, right? The writer of the book of Hebrews is talking about discipline and God's discipline of his children, and he's using this metaphor of like a father and a child who disciplines out of love. He says this in verse 11 of Hebrews 12, no discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. It's so true in life. That's how we grow and we become a better version of ourselves. And you cannot get everything you want, and you can't have everything go your way all the time. And also at the same time, be an amazingly healthy, mature, deep human being. It is through pruning that we become more like Jesus. Second fill-in, though, this one is very counterintuitive. Pruning proves that God is at work in your life. It's actually evidence that he is at work in your life. It's the opposite of how some of us have heard about God and from people on like television preachers or the books we read or podcasts we listen to or even well-intentioned parents, grandparents, and Sunday school teachers. We hear this, that comfort and ease of life and prosperity and all good things come to those who follow God's rules. Actually, the life of ease is a result of God's blessing in your life from following all of his rules. Pain and hardship, some of us here, is because we're not trusting God and we're not following all the rules. And when there's pain in your life, it's evidence of sin in your life. And that's a lie from the pit of hell. Sometimes pain is because we disobey God. Listen, if you lie, people are not going to trust you. And I've noticed something about people who lie perpetually and everyone cuts them off and they want to be a victim. Like, boo-hoo, woe is me. And it's like, no, you're an untrustworthy person, and that's what happens to untrustworthy people. When you lie and you get caught, people don't trust you. Sometimes pain is because we disobey God, and it's the natural consequences. But there's sometimes, many times in life, that our pain is part of this fallen world, and it's God's megaphone in your life. And God is saying, are you listening to me yet? But here's what's amazing, that these opportunities for you to become a deeper, more beautiful disciple of Jesus, for those who go through it, can often become your most cherished seasons of growth in your life over time. And when you go through those seasons of life, of God pruning you, making you deeper, more mature, more like Jesus, you would never wish those experiences on anybody else because it was so hard. But at the very same time, you would never trade the intimacy with Jesus and the growth in your life that would have never happened if everything would have been uncomfortable all the time. And for those who have gone through God's pruning in their lives, deep, meaningful pruning, it can be very hard to talk about because it's so personal and it is so hard to put into words what God does when he prunes us. In a healthy, typical situation, a child in pain runs to a parent for comfort and safety and relief from what hurts. And loving parents know that relationships grow when the child feels secure in those moments, right? When a child is in pain, a parent who brings comfort and security, the relationship grows. Our relationship with God is the same way. And you know that a person has been in the arms of their loving Heavenly Father when they have been through God's pruning in their lives. In fact, you know them, you've probably seen them. They don't have to tell you God has pruned them. You just see it. You see a stability and a joy and a peace and a boldness that could only come from God's pruning lives. The Apostle Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, he talks a bit like this from his own experience. He has this thorn in the flesh. We don't know what it was specifically, but it was something really painful. He asked God to take it away. God said no 3 times. And here's what he says in verse 8 and 9 of 2 Corinthians 12. He says, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect. Weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses so that Christ's power may rest. God's power is made perfect in weakness, not strength. Pain is so different when you know God doesn't waste it. In fact, he's making you a more fruitful person when you abide in Jesus. So the third thing of what does it mean to abide in Jesus is to define godly success. What is success in your life? You have to define it. The scary reality is this. Many of us, especially many of us Christians, who live in the wealthy and still very religious West, here like we do in America, we actually know how to succeed at things that don't really matter. We even know how to succeed at spiritual looking things that really don't matter. We are very good at it. Tim Kiziar says this, our greatest fear as individuals and as a church should not be of failure, but of succeeding at things in life that don't really matter. That should terrify us all, no matter who we are. How do you know what really matters in life? How do you keep your heart and your mind attuned to the things that you crave most in life? This is where your habits matter. John Calvin said this, the human heart is a perpetual idol factory. And he's right. We are constantly chasing idols, things that we put in place of God. And you and I are prone to take good things and force them to become the most important things. And when we do that and we put them on the throne of our hearts, they fail us every time. So you and I need habits in our lives that keep us attuned to God because we are constantly wandering. And listen, We constantly, by the idol factories that we're prone to, we sabotage our own joy in life when we put idols on the throne in place of King Jesus in our hearts. And God knows that. And so Jesus tells us really, really clearly in this metaphor. Verse 4, there, that second phrase, Jesus says, no branch can bear fruit by itself. So without a connection to the vine, nothing you do matters. Okay, Jesus is even more clear in verse 5. This phrase in there, Jesus says this, apart from me, you can do nothing. I think this is one of the most terrifying verses in all the Bible. I can explain it away so many different ways. I can define success so many different ways and waste my life on things that don't matter. And in the end, Jesus says, apart from abiding in Him, you can do nothing. So things that matter for all eternity can only be done by abiding in Him. You can fool other people with your religiosity, but you cannot fool Jesus. There are plenty of scandals in churches, plenty of church leaders who have fallen, plenty of churches pursuing all the wrong things, and they give off the appearance of success, and all of a sudden, finally, when character is exposed, all of a sudden, things come crashing down. Lots of examples of them. People trying to accomplish all sorts of godly-looking things apart from abiding in Jesus. And in fact, the next couple of weeks, all these other habits we'll talk about in our core 4, they're actually all worthless without you abiding in Jesus too. It actually fundamentally starts with that verse, understanding that apart from abiding in Jesus, you can do nothing. Can you imagine meeting your Maker someday? Feeling pleased with all of your accomplishments and hearing from Him, actually, none of it matters because you didn't abide in me. But there's good news. There is actually great news. You can bring nothing to Jesus that impresses Him. Did you know this? He doesn't beg you to be with Him because you are so great, but nor does He groan every time you come to Him in need. He simply loves you the way you are, and He wants good things for you. We are the ones who think that we must impress Him, or we suppose that He must not have time for little people like ourselves. Actually, He sees exactly who you are. He knows the good, the bad, and the ugly of you, and He not only sees who you are, He also sees who you can become. Mature, deeper, focused, more comfortable in your own skin. He sees you more like Jesus. And Jesus is simply saying to us, be with me so you can become more like me. So how do you abide in Jesus? Well, what's the habits anyway? You and Jesus, the branch staying connected to the vine. There are historic practices for how we can abide in Jesus, and there are many of them. I just want to give us a few of them. Some of us know what these are, but let's be honest, some of us see them as a checklist, and they're not a checklist. These are foundational habits for abiding in Jesus. And the first is to simply read the Bible and do what it says. And there are many ways to do it, but I encourage you to make it a habit in your life. It is hard to stay connected to the vine when our wandering minds are so prone, we are perpetual idol factories. And it's hard to stay connected to the vine when we don't know what is true and good and right. And we need to read the scriptures so that we know who we are and we never forget whose we are. The second habit is to communicate with God in prayer and making it a habit. Talking to God because He cares, He listens, He answers prayer. For some of us, we don't know where to start. And here's what I would say. You want to learn where to start to learn how to pray? Read the Psalms. The Psalms teach us to pray. The Psalms are not sanitized for good church prayers. They are raw, they are real, and they teach us to pray to our Heavenly Father. Third, learning to listen to the Spirit's voice. I have known people who literally hear God's voice so clearly that I am envious of them. And I know people who have tried to learn to listen and they never seem to get a word from God. My suggestion is to ask God to speak in a way that you know it's Him. And when you hear Him, don't second guess it. Do what it says. Fourth, another practice is to simply practice solitude away from distractions. You and I need things built into our lives to recalibrate our wandering hearts and minds. Solitude, regular time getting away from noise and people pulling at you and setting your heart and mind in order to be more like Jesus. We need it in our lives, and you and I both know that it will not happen on accident. You have to plan solitude away from distractions to be with Jesus. I know when I do it, I know that without exception, I always get clarity on something I need to stop doing or something I need to start doing when I practice solitude and I spend time with Jesus. I'm always reminded that I'm loved in the presence of Jesus. In solitude, I'm reminded I don't have to perform because He loves me as I am. The distractions in life simply tell me I must perform. Solitude reminds me I'm loved. And in solitude, I'm reminded painfully, humbly, I'm not nearly as great as I want to believe in the presence of a holy God. I'm also reminded that I'm not as horrible as I am also prone to believe at the same time. I'm a work in progress. I am a child of King Jesus. And in church, you, in Christ, you are a branch called to produce fruit, and you can do nothing apart from abiding in Jesus. So the habit of abiding is choosing to be with the one who chooses to love you in spite of you. And in developing the habit of abiding in Jesus, you will grow. So when we talk about the core for abiding in Jesus, it is the habits that we want to form in our lives to be with Jesus. Because you can do nothing apart from abiding in Jesus.